You can make money in any asset class, any segment. You just can't make money in all of them at once.
Hello and welcome to Pillars of Wealth Creation, where we talk about creating financial success with a special focus on business and real estate. I'm your host, Todd Dexheimer. Now, let's get to it. Hello and welcome back to Pillars of Wealth Creation. I'm your host, Todd Dexheimer. With me, excited to have Daniel Casey. Daniel, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Appreciate you joining us. A little bit about Daniel, and then I'll let you fill in. But 20 years in the construction industry as a general contractor, mostly the heavy civil, the construction or the commercial type. Made a switch to multifamily investing full time in 2019, and his company's called North 40 Capital. And they currently own a bunch of apartments, some commercial spaces, industrial, and also a motel. So all kind of in that greater Tacoma, Washington area. So anyways, with that said, Daniel, why don't you just give our listeners a bit more about your background, and kind of we'll dive into what you're doing now.
Okay. So I actually started my career thinking that I was going to be a CPA. I graduated from UCLA with a degree in mathematics and finance, and I was a CPA candidate, and I got a job working for KPMG, which was a large CPA firm right out of college. And probably within the first 2 weeks of doing that, I realized that I did not want to be a CPA, and that the whole lifestyle of public accounting was not for me. I was in a group that we traveled out every Sunday evening and didn't return till late Friday night, and I was 52 weeks a year, and it was just wow. It just didn't line up with what I was looking for a lifestyle.
Yeah.
So I stuck with that for 2.5 years, but during those 2.5 years, I was looking for other businesses I could get involved in. And, kind of in a somewhat random way, we landed on construction. And honestly, the primary reason we landed on construction was just because it seemed like something that could be started with virtually no capital. And then we specifically went into public works construction because we liked the idea that the low bidder won the job. You didn't have to actually convince anybody to hire you or have any sort of a track record. It was simply a matter of putting in the lowest bid, and they were more or less obligated to take you. So back in 2000, we started our first construction company, and that company primarily did everything we did was bridge related. We did a lot of seismic retrofits and repairs, widening. We basically did in about a 10-year span, we only built, I don't know, 4 bridges ground up, maybe, and almost everything we did was a repair or retrofit in some fashion. So
interesting.
That was kind of my career for the first 10 years of it.
How do you get into something like that? You're a CPA going to building bridges. I mean, kind of a serious thing to build a bridge, right?
So my personal background with construction was that I had framed houses for one summer during college. So I had that tiny little sliver of construction background. And then I had a partner in that construction company, and his father was a civil engineer who had worked for the state DOT doing bridge related engineering and bridge related construction work. And then he had a kind of consulting / general contractor business that he operated that did some really specialized consulting and repair on bridges. So that was like our little window into the world of bridge construction. And we just liked when, we chose it because it's a fairly specialized niche, and there was minimal competition. Like on the jobs we were bidding on for the bulk of that first 10 years, we would be bidding on jobs where there was maybe only 2 to 4 bidders. So the profit margins were good, and it was competitive, but not highly so. But there's really not. It wasn't like we considered 100 different construction disciplines and landed on bridges. Like we just kind of picked it and went with it.
Just kind of picked them, and sometimes that's the best way, right? I mean, it's. Yeah, I talk to people in real estate all the time about that. And they're like, what should I do in real estate? I'm like, look, you just got to pick one. There's a million different ways to make money in business and real estate, and anything you do, you just got to pick one. You just pick bridges, and you're like, hey, let's go. Let's do it. You knew maybe a little bit about it, or had somebody that knew a little bit about it, and you're like, let's go. Let's become an expert in that, and let's make that our niche. And that's That's probably the most valuable piece of advice you can give somebody is just pick a niche and go for it and make it yours, own it.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I mean, in business and in specifically in real estate, I mean, I meet people all the time who are, you know, trying to decide what discipline of real estate they want to get in, or oftentimes these people have their hands in like 6 different
Yeah, they're
disciplines of real estate.
dabblers.
And it's like, I mean, the reality is there's money in all of it.
Yep.
You can make money in any asset class, any segment. You just can't make money in all of them at once. So it's like, you just got to figure out what it is you like and become really good at it. And, there's like, yeah, I mean, you can, whatever your flavor is, there's a way to make it profitable.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I love that. I can't make money on all of them at once. It's just not going to happen. You're probably going to just not do well, and you do less than average in all of them. Which why do you want to do that?
Yeah, it's a recipe for mediocrity. I mean, it's probably the number one thing when I meet people who are kind of stalled out at some kind of net worth level or whatever. It's almost always a lack of focus. They're trying to do half a dozen different things in half a dozen different geographies or industry segments, and they're just kind of doing average of all.
Is there anything that you do in particular? Is it just something you've just kind of been disciplined in, or to make sure you're focused and you're focused on just that, not kind of just being everywhere? Anything that you've done or that has helped you?
I don't know that I have any magic recipe for it, and I'm significantly better at this now than I was, 5 years ago, 10 years ago,
Yeah.
15 years ago. I think one thing is I really in my own, just kind of my own thought process, I always try to think about, kind of what's my, I either call it return on hassle, or like, what's kind of my, I really try to manage my attention more so than my time, and I think that's just a big thing, trying to develop the discipline to say no to things because you know that they're going to require an outsized amount of attention, or they're going to create, an outsized amount of hassle, relative to the opportunity. And I mean, I think thinking that way, serves me pretty well. I mean, because there's a lot of things that sometimes don't necessarily take time I mean, attention and time are related, but they're not necessarily the same thing, right? Like there's some things that don't require a ton of time, but, suck up a whole lot of, kind of brain capacity. And then on the other hand, there's some stuff that maybe takes time, but honestly doesn't require a ton of attention, like you just sort of show up and, do your thing and move on.
I like that. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that. Manage your attention, not your time necessarily. And I would agree with that. I mean, it's all about it's the return on hassle, the ROH. What's this thing going to do? How much brain damage is this going to cause me, cause our company, and how much of a hassle, a headache is this going to be for us, and is it the right fit? Just because it makes a lot of money or potentially makes a lot of money doesn't mean it's worth the attention, the time commitment, the attention commitment, the brain damage commitment doesn't always equate. So I love that kind of thought process behind it. Well, take me through then your business today. So are you doing the construction still? Do you still have that company?
Well, we do, but with a totally different flavor. So, after the 10 years of doing the bridge construction stuff, we got into doing commercial construction, and we started doing just kind of general, tenant improvements, renovations, and we ended up doing some multifamily and some senior living renovations as a general contractor. And that's what really opened our eyes to the world of investment real estate.
Mhm.
And so we basically, kind of long story short, we made a decision in 2018, we bought our first small apartment building. We bought an 8-unit apartment building. And then in 2019, we made the decision that we were going to stop doing any outside customer construction work. And so we really downsized the construction company. We went from about 5 million a year in revenue to, I think the smallest year was like $250,000 a year in revenue, just doing our own projects. And then since then, we built it back up. So 2023, we'll do about $4 million a year in revenue as a GC, but all of that all of that work will be on our own projects, no more customers.
Gotcha.
So yeah, we still do construction, and it's still kind of our niche in the multifamily world as we look for redevelopment opportunities, and we perform those projects as a GC. But yeah, it's very different than it was before.
When you're talking redevelopment, are you talking like taking an office building, turn it into multifamily, or what type of redevelopment are you talking about?
No, I mean, like our ideal property would be to find like a 60s, 70s, maybe 80s vintage garden style apartment complex that's kind of currently maybe a C minus, B plus type property, but in an A neighborhood. And so what we like to do, very heavy renovations. So we would not just totally transform the individual units, but we do a lot of common area improvements, and we add amenities, and we basically try to create a product that can compete with kind of the new A class stuff that's in the neighborhoods we're working in. New A class apartments are all going to be kind of mid-rise type urban style developments. And so if we can create a B plus A minus product in an older garden style community, we like that. We can compete pretty well against that A product.
Yeah, that
so I mean
makes
that's
sense.
so it's heavy value add.
So somebody who, obviously heavy value add, maybe they shouldn't get into it for their first deal, right? But somebody who wants to do some heavier value add, really is attracted to doing something like that. What are some tips that you can give them? What are some things that they should really be aware of, or maybe some pitfalls that they've got to look out for? Let's talk a little bit through that.
Well, I mean, I definitely think that, and this speaks to our business model is, I think it's a huge advantage to be the contractor. I mean, I think if you're a value add investor and you don't have a strong in-house, construction background, that's a big risk, right? So, I mean, I think for a lot of real estate investors, that the construction cost and the relationship with their general contractor is a big risk. So, figuring that part out, whether you partner with a contractor or just develop a really deep relationship where you have somebody that you can trust. And then, we kind of look at every project. Like if I'm looking at an opportunity, the first thing I'm going to look at is, what's the most, what's kind of the highest value we could provide in this neighborhood? What would be the level of, like, what would be the highest level of rent we could achieve, and who would be the tenant? And then we kind of back into, well, like what would we have to provide in terms of facilities and services to attract that tenant? And then it's kind of like, well, what would that cost? What's it going to cost to convert this to that? And then you just start working the numbers backwards to see if it works. Like, can I buy this for a cheap enough price to put the amount of money it's going to take into it? And I mean, I think that's we're very focused on the end product. And I think that's not, I'm not sure that every value add investor has the same sort of focus. A lot of people are focused primarily on financial metrics like, NOIs or cap rates. And we're basically interested in what's the highest quality housing product we think we can sell in this market.
Are you then, you complete that project, and are you guys selling it pretty quickly? Are you holding it long term? What's your strategy?
Our objective is we've sold one property in the last 4 years since we started doing this. Our goal with all of these properties is to own and operate them long term. So we're always buying them with the primary goal of completing the renovation or the redevelopment, and then refinancing it, returning the capital to whoever the equity investors are, and then holding that property for indefinitely.
And when you return the capital, are you exiting the investors, or how does that work with your investors?
No, we have we have 3 properties in our portfolio of 6 properties that have equity partners in it. So the first 50 or so units that we did this to was all our own capital. So there's a little bit different flavor to each of those in terms of how we have the relationship with the investors structured. But the general concept is we don't take any fees or any distributions. Like any distributions paid out of the asset are paid to the investors as a return of capital until such point as they have 100% of their capital back. And then once they receive 100% of their capital back, there's an equity split, them and us, and the goal is to keep it long term, which is an advantage to both of us. I mean, we're interested in the long-term wealth creation, and then to the investors, it's a lot of them are really motivated by tax savings, and the fact that they're not getting exited out of the deal means that they're not paying any recapture on that depreciation, and so it's a kind of a win-win for them.
Yeah. So they invest $100,000 and you keep it long term. They're just staying in it.
Yeah, and the returns, and
even with the
the
refinance, what
was
if
that?
if you refinance, do they get bought out, or is it just they just stay in?
No, I mean, in the way we have it structured, there's no mechanism, to get them out. Like they would just basically be in forever.
Yeah.
And they would just have an equity, there's just an equity split once their capital is returned.
Yep. That sounds good. So what's a trap for a '60s built? What's a trap? What are some like hazards that you got to look out for if you're going to buy a '60s or early '70s vintage product?
I mean, I think, probably the best advice is don't underestimate the, complexity of getting the plumbing right. I mean, I think that's a big issue we deal with on all these, on anything we're doing. We're typically trying to do things like add dishwashers, add washers and dryers.
Yeah.
Kind of creating kind of modern A-class amenities in these older buildings. And, especially if you're 60s, 70s vintage, you're going to be dealing with galvanized plumbing, and it's not impossible. And I don't necessarily think you have to replace every single bit of galvanized pipe, but it's not cheap. And, it's definitely going to require cost and effort to replumb these units in a way that you can put in modern fixtures and, not create a constant maintenance hassle.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the plumbing, because man, I've bought some early '70s built and older, but that galvanized plumbing and the cast iron, and man, that's just a mess, and it's it's beyond its life expectancy right now. And so if you're venturing into the you know '60s, '70s, I would say mid '70s or earlier, just pay attention to what the plumbing is, and no, you're probably going to have to do a lot of work there. Are you guys doing the whole works, or are you just kind of fixing what needs to be fixed and then allowing that to kind of stay in? Are you keeping galvanized in, I guess, the buildings, your long term, so are you leaving it in?
So we've done both. We have some buildings that we've completely repiped. But the stuff we're working on right now, we're not completely repiping them. We are leaving galvanized in place, but we're, like when we get into a unit, like, we completely change all the fittings, all the, we would never reuse a shower valve or something like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're basically continuing to use galvanized as the primary transport lines, but once you get to each unit, it's, it's 100% PEX within the unit.
Yeah.
And that's been kind of, I mean, I'm not sure, you can come back and ask me 10 years from now if that was a smart idea or not. But, we might be kicking the can down the road and be dealing with a big maintenance problem later. But, especially in some of these larger communities, there's an awful lot of pipe, in the ground and in the walls. And, we've decided that we're not going to, replace all of it yet.
Yeah, I think you have to decide, what's worth a headache and a hassle. That's a lot of headache and hassle to replace all that cast and galvanized. Eventually, at one point in time, that building will have all new plumbing. But if you're holding it long term, can you just put a budget in place that's gonna kind of keep you protected and insulated? And that, hey, look, every year we're spending whatever it is, 30, 40, 50,000, whatever it might be, on plumbing repairs. And that's just how it's going to be. You're probably fine as long as you do a good job budgeting and understanding that's a problem. Like, that's a problem. That cast iron's not going to last forever, and you're going to have a leak here and there, and you just got to fix it. And so that, I don't think there's necessarily a right and wrong. I've done both, like you have too. But you just got to be aware it's a problem.
Yeah. And one thing we do is we try to be smart about it. Like we'll put in quite a few valves as we're doing these renovations. So a lot of times you get these buildings where, there's just a single water shut off for like 40 units or something, or like or entire communities. We had one, a 64 unit community that consisted of 7 different residential buildings, and there was one water shut off for the whole thing. So every time there was a problem, you were killing 64 units worth of water. So
Yeah.
in that situation, we didn't replace all the plumbing, but we did install shut-off valves at each individual building so that we could, never have to shut off more than 8 units worth of water at a time if we needed to do any sort of work on it. So we try to do that kind of stuff, try to think ahead a little bit so that we're not, so that if we do have problems in the future, they're not going to be disasters.
We've got a building like that. It's just a nightmare. Anytime you have to do any plumbing work, you have to shut the entire building down. And fortunately, it's a big complex. And so there's almost nothing you can do about it without spending an enormous amount of money. So what we've done actually is we've got a schedule set up that plumbers will come during the week at specific times, and we will try to hold all of our plumbing. Now, of course, there's emergency plumbing that has to happen. It just happens, right? You can't have a leak, a massive leak going for, 4 days before a plumber comes in just on your schedule. But for the most part, it's 2 days a week and specific hours. And that's when the plumbers come to do all the work. And so the tenants just know that, hey, I can't remember what day it is. Tuesday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., the water could get shut off. But it's a pain. It's a pain. Old plumbing systems are so joyous. I love them. What's a mistake, Daniel, that you've made, whether it be in the construction, whether it be in any of the real estate, the business, whatever it is? What's a mistake that you've made, and how can you pass down what you've learned to our listeners?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, back when we had the construction company, when we were doing all of the civil work, when things were going really well, we were aggressively growing, but we were also taking on a lot more overhead, and that ultimately proved to be a real problem. Like we were basically in full growth mode, and we were hiring, and we were adding equipment, and we were doing all the things that we thought at the time were really prudent, but we basically created a system where we needed a certain amount of growth just to kind of keep the engine running. And and then when things slowed down, we just couldn't offload those expenses quick enough. And so, I'd say that's one kind of general business problem. And then I think on the flip side, I probably, because of that lesson learned, I probably have the opposite problem now where, we're realizing that we probably need to do the opposite. We need to be more aggressively growing our capacity as an operator. And, we really leaned in the last 6 months to hiring really high quality people, and we were probably a little too late to get started on some of that. So we probably we've been treading water a little bit because we kind of bit off more than we could chew. We didn't have the resources to get it done fast enough. So I think a lot of that, I don't know what the right answer is, but balancing that equation of having the right resources, and at the same time not creating too big of an overhead burden. I think that it's a fine line to walk, but that's something that we've struggled with, and we're still working on it.
Yeah, that's always a work in progress, right? Because you want to continue to grow, you want to build a business, but you also, that overhead can be a major burden if things are, things slow down, like you said. All of a sudden you've got overhead that you got to pay for. You got to figure out how to make that happen. And if you're not doing as much business, it can get challenging. And so yeah, we've done the same. We've tried to grow with thinking about our overhead and going, okay, do we, the biggest thing, the thing I always want to try to make sure continues in the business is that we don't have to do deals. We don't have to do deals just to stay afloat, which puts us in a pretty strategic position, right? It means we don't have to go buy that apartment building that we probably shouldn't buy. It means we don't have to get that acquisition fee that some other companies have to get just to keep the lights on. That's a great position to be in. So I appreciate you telling that. So you got some multifamily, but you have some other types of real estate. We talked earlier, right, about staying in your lane and making sure you're concentrating on what you're good at. What made you confident that you could buy the motel, buy the industrial, buy some of those other commercial buildings and still not feel like you're out of your own lane?
Okay, well, so most of the other stuff we have came first. So that was actually
Okay,
when,
gotcha.
when we owned my first property I ever bought was a duplex, and it was actually I lived in half of it for a couple of years. So and it wasn't a house hack per se, but it was just we didn't even understand the term house hacking, but it just seemed like a prudent thing to do. So we owned a
Yep.
duplex, and then along the way we bought an office building because the construction company needed an office. And then we bought a small industrial building and a yard because the construction company needed a shop. And so those buildings we picked up not with any sort of an investment intention, just kind of out of necessity. And then
Operations.
then we started buying multifamily with a lot more intention. And then we ended up with the motel because we bought it in the beginning of well, we bought it during COVID, and in Washington, I don't know what it was like in your neck of the woods, but we had the extended eviction moratoriums and
Yep.
a lot of restriction on apartment operations. And so for our construction business, they're primarily in the business of renovating apartments, and if people weren't moving in or out, there was really we didn't have a robust supply of apartments to renovate. And so this motel opportunity was presented to us, and it was initially presented as an apartment conversion, but it didn't really work in that regard. But we felt like it was a, interesting enough business to operate, and it would provide, it's a 52-room motel, so basically 52 units that needed to be renovated. And it was basically a chunk of construction work that we would be able to control. And so that was why we bought it. On the one hand, the hotel is a lot of fun and it's a fun challenge, but it is a huge distraction, and it is a lot more, a lot more difficult to operate than I think we, gave it credit for. And so I'm not sure I would go back and do it again, but, and I think it kind of illustrates the point I made earlier that you've really got to stay in your lane and manage your attention, because turns out there's really not that much similarity between multifamily and motel operations. And
there's
the
people
motel,
that are in both, but that's
right,
where it
exactly,
ends.
right. So I think the best advice I've gotten related to the motel was somebody told me that I either need to sell it or buy 5 more. And that's probably really good advice. You either got to build a big enough business around it that you can put an operator in place and get a true, get kind of a true A player to run it, or I just need to find an exit point and get rid of it so it's not a distraction to us. So I'm not sure which one of those routes we'll take, but that's kind of where we're at.
Well, and it makes sense, right? Because you're operating a small motel, which if you think about who owns most of those, it's mom and pa, right? It's a lot of times it's somebody that's living right on site, or they get the house right next door, or whatever it is. Otherwise, it's the Motel 6 that's got a ton of them, and so you don't really see the operators besides that, right? You don't see a company like yours operating a lot of them, so that makes a lot of sense. So we're either gonna know you as the motel guy, with 30 different motels, or we'll just know that's a chapter in your story. That's all.
Exactly.
Love it. Well, Daniel, I got a couple last questions before we wrap up. One question: how do you like to give back?
It's a good question. So we're, I'll give you 2 answers here. My wife and I are both involved in a ministry called Young Life. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but
Yeah.
my wife's actually been involved for a number of years in a segment of Young Life called Young Lives, which is focused on teen mothers. And so we've done given back and done a lot through that, and we're still pretty involved in our local One Life organization. Um, the other thing is, I think long term, in more generalities, we have a lot of my wife and I are both very interested in poverty, and specifically how young mothers play into poverty and play into the solutions around poverty. So I think as we kind of a longer term purpose in our life is to really look at how to provide education and long-term growth opportunities specifically focused around young women and specifically mothers, and as a way to help lift communities out of poverty.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, providing the education, right? That's the biggest thing. You can don't go ahead and provide food or housing or clothing, and those things are definitely blessings to people who are in poverty and are struggling. But the most valuable thing is the education, because there's no way they're getting out of it. You just providing money is not going to get them out of the problem. It's going to make them feel good. It's definitely going to be of benefit, but it's not going to stop the cycle. So I love that. All right, couple last questions. So what's a favorite book?
I read a lot, and so it's hard to nail down a favorite book.
Maybe something you read recently that you like.
Hey, that's what I was going to go with. So a book I read a couple weeks ago that I really liked was The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. I've read a handful of his books, but I felt like this one was particularly impactful and just generally a good book.
The Advantage. Who is it by again?
Patrick Lencioni.
Got it.
He's probably most famous for, he wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It was a leadership table that's a pretty popular book. But The Advantage is actually, like, most of his books are fables. He writes these kind of, fictional stories about, corporate teams, and you learn different lessons about leadership through the fables. But The Advantage is actually just a typical kind of nonfiction book where he basically pulls the wisdom from 3 or 4 of his other books and kind of puts it into a fairly succinct framework. So it's good.
Love it. Love it. Well, I appreciate you giving me a book that I've never heard of. A lot of times I've already heard of the book, but this one's definitely not. So that's great. A last question. What are your 3 pillars of wealth creation?
So, what comes to my mind first is, I would say, impact, growth, and freedom. And those are probably as much personal core values as they are pillars of wealth creation. But in everything we do as a company and everything I do as an individual, I'm always looking to maximize impact. So like when we're looking for investment opportunities or for communities that we can work in, or even once we own a community and we're putting together designs, we want to be confident that everything we're doing is going to have a tangible impact on somebody's life. At the end of the day, if you're in the business of owning and operating multifamily, you're in the business of providing people with housing, and the quality of that housing is going to ultimately determine the value of your property and this, financial success of your investment. So we're really laser focused on providing real value. And then growth and freedom, I mean, why we enjoy what we're doing and why I'm ultimately, investing in multifamily and operating a multifamily company is because, I like the freedom that it gives me and gives my employees, my family. I mean, it's all about being able to have choices and make decisions for your life. And then, growth, that's something that that I focus on a lot and that we focus on as a company. It's all about the acquisition of skills and being better tomorrow than you were yesterday. And, at such point as there's nothing more to learn and nowhere else to grow, I'll probably do something else.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're, I like I don't know if I made it up or somebody else. I'm sure somebody else did, because I'm not that smart. But if you're not growing, you're dying. Right. I love that little saying there that somebody made up, I'm sure. Well, man, I really appreciate it. Daniel, been really good. How can our listeners reach out, get in touch with you, learn more about North 40 Capital, kind of what you got going on?
So we've got a website. They can go out to north40capital.com. They can also email me. My email is Daniel@BlackRockNW, like Northwest.com. I'm on Facebook. You can find me there. I'm on LinkedIn, but it's probably not your fastest route to communication. So, but email or Facebook are both reasonable ways to get a hold of me.
Cool. Awesome. Again, really appreciate it, man. Any last words of wisdom you want to pass down?
No, I mean, I just appreciate the discussion. I like talking, obviously I like talking multifamily. I like talking multifamily operations, and it's just fun to have a chance to, kind of share our point of view with somebody else in the industry. So, it's been great.
Well, you have a fantastic rest of the day.
Yeah, you too.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. I appreciate you being a loyal listener. I would love to have you go on to our Facebook page and subscribe, give us a thumbs up, go on to iTunes or wherever you listen and give us a rating and review. Don't forget to subscribe. But your rating and review just helps us push this out to more and more people and continue to grow our audience and hopefully positively affect a ton of people out there that really need this and want this. So the other thing I've got for you is a free ebook on my website. So go on to venturedproperties.com, and download our free ebook on real estate and on syndication. And I've got some data points in there, some really good stuff for you. So I'd love to have you take a look at that. It's free. I'm not expecting anything from it. And also, look, if you want some help in multifamily, want some help learning, growing, getting your business off the ground, I would love to talk to you about what it would look like to work with me potentially and see if that's a good fit. So you can go to coachwithdex.com and check that out, and we can definitely have a call. Thanks a lot for listening. You make it a fantastic rest of the day. I'll catch you on the next episode.